Well, hello and welcome to CBN News special election coverage. I'm Dan Andros, managing editor of CBN News Digital. I'm joined today by David Brody, who's chief political analyst for CBN News, and Nathan Gonzales, editor of Inside Elections and Faith Nation contributor. Gentlemen, thanks for being here.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
Dan.
Yeah, so this wasn't necessarily the most anticipated election in recent history, guys. I mean, compared to 2022, there was a lot of hype before the midterms there. Obviously, 2020 was one of the most hotly contested of recent history, but it was still considered sort of a bellwether election, I guess, if you want to say, on several issues, abortion on the docket. And look, the key states people were zeroing in on: Ohio, Virginia, Kentucky, and Democrats seemed to have a pretty good night. So, David, I'll start with you. Virginia, they have elections every year. The numbers were looking good for Youngkin heading into the night. Some were even saying maybe he'd be a late entry into the 2024 race if things went well, but it didn't really go so well. What happened there?
Yeah, well, so much for Glenn Youngkin in 2024. Good night on that storyline. So we can put that to rest for sure. Well, there's a lot going on. Look, I think, and Nathan, I think you'd be the first to say there's an asterisk to all of this, which is it's an off-year election. And it's hard to draw the apples to apples comparisons, but I think we get a sense of some of the warning signs for either party. And I think in this case, clearly, danger straight ahead for Republicans on the abortion issue. I'm sure we'll get to that here in a little bit, especially out of Ohio. But as it relates to Virginia, sure, it's a bellwether state to a degree. And, the exit polling that I have seen, and we can get more into this, especially out of Ohio, we are seeing that indeed turnout was down among conservatives. It just was. Now, maybe not as much in Virginia compared to Ohio, but the truth of the matter is that, the MAGA conservative hardcore group, if you will, they showed up, but they didn't fully show up. Donald Trump has a magnet on them, and they will show up in 2024. They're not going to have the same electorate makeup in 2023. So I think that's part of what's going on here. Having said that, Virginia, that's a big win, obviously, for Democrats to get both the House and the Senate. And of course, it stops Youngkin in his tracks for all of that legislation that he wanted to accomplish, including a pro-life legislation too. So Nathan, I don't know where you see it, but clearly a really good night for Democrats, but with the asterisk for sure.
Yeah, I think it was a great night for Democrats. I'm struggling to find what is the good news for. It was a great night for Democrats. I'm struggling to find what the good news is for Republicans, and maybe the best news is that it wasn't a presidential election, right? There was still a whole slate of elections in 2024. But each individual Democratic victory wasn't a surprise. But when you line them all up together, it's an impressive list, right? Winning, now having full control of the legislature in Virginia, winning the governorship in Kentucky, winning key ballot measures in Ohio, even keeping and expanding their majorities in New Jersey, where the state legislature was on the ballot. And it was remarkable, even holding the governor of Mississippi, Tate Reeves, to about a 5-point victory. And but what we're seeing right now is this sort of conversation about, well, does this mean that Biden is in stronger position than what we initially thought? I actually think that this doesn't say that. I think that Biden is still in a weak position, but it shows that Democrats can win elections even though Biden is unpopular. And I think particularly that governor's race in Kentucky, where Democratic Governor Andy Beshear won re-election, is that it's possible for Democratic candidates to cultivate their own brands that sort of transcend the partisanship of a state or a district. And the race in Kentucky is the type of race that Republicans need to win in Montana or West Virginia or Ohio next year in the Senate races to win back the Senate majority.
Nathan, you bring up Kentucky here. And is this an issue of is it hard to sort of project like what that means for 2024 going forward? Because with Kentucky, it's a deep red state, obviously, right now. And so, Beshear being an incumbent, like, are people just comfortable with that? I mean, it's kind of an odd dynamic. Is it really something we can draw from 2024 because of that?
Well, it's funny because Kentucky, certainly not a presidential battleground. Kentucky governor's races going back 20 years have voted the party who won the Kentucky governor's race won the presidential race in the next year. So, I'm not going to call Kentucky a bellwether, but there is that streak that is in place. But what happened in Kentucky was you did have a popular Democratic governor, but I think the lesson coming out of it is that some of the Republican messaging against that Democrat just did not work. The attacks on Governor Beshear on crime, the attacks just simply tying him to President Biden, it didn't work. It wasn't enough to bring him down. And what Democrats tried to do against Daniel Cameron, they used the issue of abortion, even and Cameron being too restrictive on access to abortion. It's remarkable that they did that in a red state like Kentucky, but that was one of the contributing factors. And again, there was that spending advantage that Democrats, including Beshear, outspent Daniel Cameron by millions of dollars, and Republicans have to solve that piece. They have to solve the piece of getting their candidates more money in order to compete with Democrats, because everyone can use this at their Thanksgiving dinner. Candidates pay less for television ads than the parties or the super PACs. And so if a candidate doesn't have enough money, the party has to come in and bail them out. They're going to be spending 2 or 3 times the amount of money for the same number of TV ads, and Republicans have to solve that situation.
Just a quick addendum or in addition to that as well. Let's remember Beshear, he has a family history. The family history there in Kentucky is important. I mean, his father, a former governor, and not only that, but governing competence matters. I mean, he's been very good when it comes to whether it be COVID or natural disasters. I mean, he's shown to be competent. Plus, as you know, Nathan, the narrative means everything. And he was kind of branded as this bit of a centrist, a bit of a moderate. He's not really, in the sense of, you look at some of the legislation that he's either vetoing or passing, but the narrative plays, and it definitely played in Kentucky. And I think you put all of that together, and he's a bit of, I don't call him an outlier. I guess he's an outlier to a degree, but I think it's a unique situation for sure.
Yeah, very interesting. Let's move into the abortion issue, because this was on the ballot essentially in at least 3 states, Kentucky, Ohio, Virginia. And look, this is something that Republicans tried to lean into. I mean, it's what a lot of people said cost them the midterms, the momentum there in 2022. So what do we do with this issues, guys? Nathan, I'll go to you. I mean, where do Republicans go from here? Clearly, this seems to be politically a winning issue for Democrats.
I think the bottom line, and we can have a full discussion, but to me, the bottom line is that Republicans, and specifically pro-life conservatives, probably should come to the realization that they might have the morally correct position, but it is politically toxic. I think we have enough data and evidence to show that the pro-life position is not politically popular. And Republicans might say, okay, we're willing to suffer losses because of the cause, or because we hold this so closely. But whether it's Ohio, I mean, it was issue 1 passed by an easy margin, and this is on the heels of Kansas and Michigan in previous years. These are not just deep blue places that are voting the pro-choice side. Looking at the exit poll that was for the Post and CNN and a large number of media outlets, 24% of white evangelicals voted in favor of issue 1. And so to me, that's striking. And I'm not here to tell Republicans or tell pro-life folks what to do, but politically, this is a toxic issue that either Republicans are going to have to figure out a different position or figure out how to win elections in spite of having this position.
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead, David.
Well, I 100% agree to all of that. I think clearly the Republicans have a messaging issue, and I hate to put abortion as a messaging issue, but the truth is, in politics, that's a big part of it. They've got to figure out how to paint Democrats as radical on abortion, and there's evidence out there. The problem is they have a bit of an ostrich strategy on this. Kind of like fingers in the ears, make it go away, and it's not going away. So they have to figure that out. And Nathan, to the exit polls, Dan, to the exit polls, real quick. Look, if you look inside that Ohio exit poll, I mean, let's go back to 2020. In 2020, 16% of the electorate in Ohio, this is 2020, not 2023. In 2020, 16% of the electorate was white college-educated women. In 2023, it was 20%. It was up 4%. In 2023. That's important. Also, let's remember that white college non-educated women number was down from 2020 down to 2023. So you look at that swing right there, you can clearly see that the momentum is on Democrats' side. And one last thing, the liberal ideology, if you look inside the exit polls, 34% liberal ideology is part of the makeup in Ohio, compared to 21% in 2020. So that's a 13% increase. The liberals are showing up on this issue. That is good news for Biden. Honestly, it's the only good news for Biden. Biden is traitorous everywhere else. But if he can get the liberals out, not for him, but on abortion and a few other issues, but let's just talk about abortion because that's pretty much the main issue, then that bodes well for him in 2024 through no credit to Biden, let's be honest. I mean, but for on the abortion issue, it helps him tremendously.
Yeah, and also in that exit poll, I think a warning sign for Republicans is that 64% of independents voted in favor of issue 1. I think independence is part of what caused Republicans to underperform in 2022 in the midterm elections. Yes, they won the House, but those numbers should have been bigger, but they lost ground in the Senate. And I think it was because independent voters who wanted change, they didn't think President Biden was doing a good job. So they looked at who Republicans were offering as the alternative, and they said, nah, I'm not comfortable. I'm not comfortable with that. I don't want to go there. I'm happy to stick with the status quo that I don't like, rather than going with Republicans. And we saw 2 different examples of how to handle abortion on Tuesday. That Daniel Cameron in Kentucky, I would say didn't really respond well to those attacks, and he ended up obviously losing. But in Virginia, Governor Glenn Youngkin, he was very upfront. He, putting forward, hey, we're going to do a 15-week ban, which politically is a pretty mainstream. That is at the point where a majority of Americans would agree with that. But it didn't work, right? It wasn't enough to win those key state legislative races.
Yeah, I mean, David, to what you were saying earlier too, I think with the messaging issue, you hate that it comes down to that, but look, right now Americans are really struggling on the economy, right? Everyone has to go buy groceries. Everyone's looking at the price of gas. These are unavoidable things, and yet here we are at an election time talking about abortion. We're talking about other issues other than the most in-your-face thing that's out there. And what Democrats have done, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, well over the past few years, is assign all of the, things that they think are scary to people to Trump. But and then that happens down ballot, right? So they blame it on Trump and they say, well, this guy's with Trump. And so then they lose that election. But the Republicans have not seemed to been able to do sort of the same thing on the other side, which is, hey, look at this. You've got Democrats in charge, and look at how bad everything is with the economy. They haven't been able to assign that. And we're sitting here talking about abortion, years after the, at least a year plus after the Roe v. Wade overturning. So to your point, guys, David, the messaging issue, what can Republicans do if they're going to turn this thing around?
Well, I mean, they're going to have to go, and they've got plenty of weapons in the arsenal, if you will. I mean, look at Ralph Northam right back in when he was governor of Virginia, talking in that radio show about, in essence, partial birth abortion. And there's lots of examples of radical Democrats having a very, let's be honest, many would say immoral position on this, up to fetal viability. But you got to go on offense, and I think that more than the messaging, I think it's more the tactics, and I think it's more the chutzpah, if you will. Do they have the get up and go to do it? And I think right now they're just scared. They're scared straight about what to do, and this is the problem. Here's the other part of the problem, and not to get into too much of the Dr. Phil, political analysis here. But look, Republicans all the time, conservatives talk about freedom, right? They want freedom for everything. Well, here are the liberals talking about, in a way, if you think about it, freedom, right? Reproductive freedom. This idea like the government's not going to tell me what to do. Well, that's what conservatives do all day long on every single other issue. except for this one. And I think that is a bit of a problem for conservatives, not on the actual issue of abortion, the way maybe people personally feel. But I think from a messaging standpoint, it's a problem because you're saying basically government hands off on everything. But on this issue, you want the government to be involved and you want to lay down that law. And I think that is just kind of problematic schematically, Nathan. I don't know how you see that.
Yeah, no, people should listen to David on that point. I think what's also helping Democrats on this issue is that it's not just about an old Supreme Court decision from a year and a half ago, that there were subsequently moves by state legislatures to go even further in restricting access. So that keeps it in the news, that keeps it as either a threat to the Democratic base or a concern for independents. And it keeps it in the news, and it's not something that is stale and in the past. To me, Republicans' best opportunity is trying to get voters to focus on something else. If the 2024 elections are about access to abortion, Democrats are going to crush it. If the 2024 elections are, do you think Biden is doing a good job? Do you think Biden has the strength and stamina for another 4 years? I'm not guaranteeing Republicans win that race, but it's going to be a whole lot closer and a whole lot more competitive. And so the fight will be what are voters focused on heading into next year.
And if I could just piggyback, Dan, real quick off of that, the good news for Republicans or the MAGA movement, if you will, is that, yes, abortion, you're right, Democrats will crush it. But the good news on the flip side is that there are a myriad of issues where Biden is underwater, whether it be the economy or immigration or national security, or, you can just go down the list, crime. So you put it all together, it could be, to use a phrase, political death by 1,000 paper cuts. You may be able to kind of nickel and dime yourself on the Republican side to say, look, all of this on one side is going to potentially negate the big move by Democrats on abortion. I think that may be the best way they can hope for a good result. I don't know. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I believe that both parties are actually trying to lose the presidential race. I'm convinced it, because Republicans are set to nominate maybe the only person who could lose to Biden under his political condition. They have chosen Biden is a vulnerable and weak incumbent politically, and now they're going to, they're set to nominate someone who's been indicted in 4 different jurisdictions, is going to be on trial, and right now people aren't focused on that. But it is going to be. I think I feel Democrats, they're getting this sense of momentum, right? Look, we overperformed in 2022. We did great in 2023. I think that understates Biden's vulnerability. I still believe that Biden is in a weaker political condition, even though Democrats had a great night.
You mentioned, you're talking about Biden and the vulnerability, excuse me, and Trump maybe not being in a great position. Nathan, I'm interested what do you think about those numbers that David mentioned? I mean, it's still showing, despite all of that, Trump performing well right now against Biden in a hypothetical matchup.
Yeah, when it comes to polling a year out from elections, sometimes it's predictive and sometimes it's not. Let's watch. 4 years ago, Biden was doing well in swing states against Trump a year out, and Biden ended up winning that election. When you go back to 2011, 2012, there were stories about Obama. Is he toast? How could he win with that economy and against a great candidate like Mitt Romney? And Obama ended up winning, and so I think what we should be able to say right now, I believe, is that we have a very evenly divided country. I think this is going to be a close and competitive race between 2 flawed nominees. And a key factor will be, what is the appetite? There's an appetite for third-party candidates, but what do third-party candidates end up getting if voters look at their 2 options and say, either I'm over this or I want something new, and does that have an impact in key battleground states?
Well, and I also just want to say, too, that I think in 2011, part of the reason why those polls were wrong is that the polling got the electorate wrong. It wasn't the methodology necessarily, Nathan, and maybe you can help me on this, but it seemed to me like you have to know what you have to project what the electorate is going to be. And if you're wrong on the electorate of who shows up and how it shakes out, then your polling is going to be off. And so I think we just don't know, Dan and Nathan, what that electorate is exactly going to be like in 2024. And I think that will make a world of difference in all of this.
You have two, I think, next year, we fast forward to a year from now, you have two competing sort of tension points on polling, right? I think you have enough data to show that Trump overperforms the polls. I think that he has shown that in two consecutive elections. But then you have this other where Democrats have overperformed polls in recent, I think 2023, 2022, Democrats overperforming in polls. So when we clash those two things together in 2024, what do we get? And that'll probably keep me up at night a little bit as someone who's trying to figure all of this out.
Well, Nathan, let me ask you this. Is there any precedent? I mean, not putting the cart before the horse here and just assuming Trump is going to be the nominee. He's got a massive lead right now, but like you said, we still have a year left, and we're just about to kick off all these actual primary voting. Is there a chance that somebody surges? I mean, is there any precedent for that, or is this kind of
in the primary? I have a hard time. I've told myself, particularly after 2016, we should all stay open-minded. I cannot think of a scenario where Trump loses the primary. I mean, the legal issues are not an issue in the primary. He has a lead, whether it's national polls or early state polls. I think he is on track to be the GOP nominee. And actually, let's say for a segment of the Republican electorate who thinks it's time to turn the page, they think someone else would be a stronger candidate. If somehow or for some reason Trump is not the nominee, I think that actually hurts Republicans, because I believe there's a segment of the Republican electorate that Trump is their guy.
Yep.
If Trump is not on the ballot, they're not going to turn out to vote, and that will be an issue not only in the race for the presidency, but also in the Senate and House races that Republicans are trying to win as well. So I kind of think Republicans have to go. If you're not all in on Trump, you kind of have to go all in, because a unified party behind Trump is going to be better than an ununified party without Trump.
Yeah, I mean, it's Trump or bust at this point. I don't think there's any question about that. And look, I think one of the things in politics, getting back to narratives, right? I mean, Trump is very good. He's not just a master brander, but he's really great at crafting a narrative, because he hits home the same point all the time, to the point where you're ready to just kind of throw up in your mouth. You're like, okay, enough already. I got it. But what he does is he's painted himself as a victim, as a sympathetic figure. The left has done him an enormous favor by continuing to go after him, to continue to put fuel on this idea that he is just this victim and a sympathetic figure. And of course, many of the Republicans believe that as well. You put it all together. Look, I'm telling you, it's back to the Fifth Avenue strategy, the Teflon strategy. I'm telling you that everybody thought his numbers would go down once he was indicted. There was a school of thought, right, before all of these indictments came down, that was going to be a problem for Trump. Well, it hasn't been. As a matter of fact, it's been the exact opposite. And I truly believe, and I don't think I'm going out on a limb here, but if for some reason he was convicted before November, I'm not suggesting there's going to be a conviction before November. It could be punted until after the election. But if he is convicted before November, everybody's going to say, oh, the conventional wisdom is that, got it, that was the death knell for Trump. That was it. I don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. I think the narrative is already formed that he's a victim of the system, that there's been a weaponization against Trump. And I think if he's convicted, which, by the way, could be overturned on appeal, but the point is that I truly believe that his numbers will actually either stay the same or potentially go up. Yeah, the swing voters, the independents, I got it. Yeah, I understand there's going to be some drop off there. But I think you'll actually get a lot of those Rust Belt Democrats, a lot of those blue-collar independents who are going to look at that and go, no, you can't do this to Trump, because they're going to see themselves the same way they see Trump, which is the system has kept me down, they're keeping Trump down. And that's the emotional connection that the media doesn't really talk about, but that's really what's going on specifically.
Yep, he certainly has that. Absolutely. All right. Hey, guys, let's hit some final thoughts here on what we saw last night and what we can expect going forward here before we head out.
Nathan, please.
Yeah, no, I think a key, we're entering a period here over the next few days where we have to listen to politicians. Now, this can be a dangerous thing to do, but David and I and Dan, we all talked about what we thought happened in the elections, but we need to listen to what the politicians, party strategists, those people, what they think happened in the election, because that is going to guide the future behavior. That's going to guide what the messaging looks like into next year. And so we're going to be in this wait and see mode because, again, how the parties react to these election results is going to have a big impact on 2024, because it will guide what is in their television ads, what messages and issues are they going to stress, what issues are they going to back away from. And so we're going to learn that over the next few days and a couple weeks.
Yeah, and I would just say maybe where I began, which is kind of the grain of salt view, which is take all of this with a grain of salt. It's 2023. You already have a lot of the top Democrat strategists out there saying, oh, this is horrible for MAGA. It's terrible for Trump. It's a black eye. Hold on for a second. Not that we want to spend another 20 minutes here, but just to quickly unpack it. Trump didn't play in Virginia, right? He didn't get involved in any of that. I think Virginia's on Youngkin if you want to put it on anybody. It's not on Trump. The Ohio situation on abortion, that's separate from Trump. As a matter of fact, you can make the argument that Trump might have been this morning saying, I told you so on abortion. All right, so that's two. The Kentucky one, all right, you want to throw a little bit of that on Trump because he endorsed Bashir's opponent. That's fine. But once again, that was a tough sell to begin with. But other than that, I'm not quite, and they won in Mississippi. The Republican won in Mississippi. So I'm not quite sure you can really put any of this on Trump, especially because MAGA didn't show up in force. There is a magnet for MAGA, and that magnet is Donald Trump. And he wasn't on the ballot, and it's directly transferable. And I think we have to be very careful not to read too much into a loss for Donald Trump and a loss for MAGA. They'll show up. They'll show up in 2024, but they're not going to show up in off-year elections as much as they will in presidential elections.
All right, David Brody, Chief Political Analyst, CBN News, and Nathan Gonzales, Editor of Inside Elections and Faith Nation contributor. Guys, thanks so much for breaking it all down. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.
No problem.